The story is one of the oldest we have. A world so wicked that its creator chose to wash it away in a great, cleansing flood. The book of Genesis tells of a cataclysm meant to reset humanity, to destroy a world tainted by violence, and by mysterious beings of immense power, the Nephilim. Genesis says the great flood wiped the slate clean. It was the end of the world before our own, a divine judgment that supposedly destroyed these beings, often interpreted as giants. The waters rose, the ark was saved, and the world began anew, free from their influence. That is the official story, the one we've been told for millennia. But what if it wasn't a complete end? What if it was a cover-up? A persistent and fascinating theory suggests the evidence of these giants wasn't entirely erased. Proponents of this theory point to ancient texts, to a trail of allegedly suppressed archaeological finds, and even to anomalies in our own DNA. Could the story of our origins be far stranger than we've been led to believe? Let's investigate the claims and compare them to the scientific and historical records. The biblical loophole and the lingering giants. To begin this investigation, we only have to look at the source itself, the Bible. Proponents of the giant theory point to a specific phrase in Genesis, chapter 6, verse 4, which states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward." Theorists ask how this is possible if the flood was a global event. Mainstream theology offers various interpretations of this phrase. However, a more fringe theory suggests the cataclysm wasn't as complete as believed. It centers on a notable omission in the biblical text, the ancestry of the wives of Noah's sons. The theory provocatively asks, what if one of these women carried the Nephilim gene? If this were true, it would mean the flood didn't erase the giant bloodline but merely created a genetic bottleneck. This isn't just speculation, it's an attempt to solve a puzzle within the biblical text itself, because after the floodwaters receded, stories of giants do reappear in the Old Testament. The spies sent by Moses into Canaan reported seeing giants that made the Israelites feel like grasshoppers, in comparison. We also read of Og, the king of Bashan, whose bed was described as being over 13 feet long. While many stories exist, there is no hard proof of skeletal remains for these biblical figures. So the biblical text itself presents what some see as a contradiction. It describes an event that wiped out the Nephilim, then continues to mention giants later on. If this bloodline survived, where is the physical proof? That is where the story takes a turn, from ancient texts to the soil of North America. A trail of bones and a conspiracy of silence. If a race of giants repopulate the earth, one would expect to find their remains. For a period in the 19th and early 20th centuries, American newspapers were filled with reports of giant skeleton discoveries. These articles, from Ohio to California, told similar stories of workers and farmers unearthing human remains of extraordinary size, sometimes reportedly over 7, 8, or even 10 feet tall. One of the most famous sites tied to these legends is Lovelock Cave, Nevada. The oral tradition of the local Paiute tribe speaks of a war their ancestors fought against a ferocious race of red-haired, cannibalistic giants they called the Cetaceh. Legend says the last of these giants were trapped in the cave and exterminated by fire. In 1911, miners began harvesting bat guano from the cave and uncovered thousands of ancient artifacts. Official archaeological excavations followed. While local lore and sensational newspaper articles reported the discovery of giant mummies over 8 feet tall, the scientific findings tell a different story. Adrian Mayer, a historian of science, suggests the giant interpretation was started by entrepreneurs for tourist displays and that the skeletons themselves were of normal size. A university study in the mid-1970s concluded the human remains from the cave belonged to people who were tall, perhaps around 6 feet, but not giants. The Humboldt Museum, which once displayed some remains, notes that the recovered skeletons were not beyond normal size parameters. As for the red hair, scientists point out that dark hair pigment can break down over time and turn a rusty red color due to environmental factors. So, what happened to the hundreds of other giant skeletons reported in newspapers? This question leads to a popular conspiracy theory alleging a systematic cover-up by the Smithsonian Institution. According to these claims, when anomalous skeletons were found, the Smithsonian would collect the bones for study, and they would never be seen again. The Smithsonian has repeatedly and officially denied these accusations, stating the claims are baseless and often originate from satirical articles or hoaxes. Researchers have found that many 19th century giant discoveries were either outright hoaxes like the famous Cardiff giant, misidentified animal bones, or exaggerations by amateur diggers unfamiliar with human anatomy. The ghost in the genome. With the physical record unconvincing, the search has moved into the laboratory. The field of genetics has revealed that our DNA contains sequences from interbreeding with other archaic humans, like Neanderthals and Denisovans. Beyond these, geneticists have found evidence of ghost populations, ancient, unknown ancestral groups whose DNA is present in modern people, but for whom we have no fossil evidence. In 2020, researchers analyzing West African genomes found that 2 to 19% of their ancestry came from an extinct ghost hominin that interbred with their ancestors. Mainstream science identifies these ghost ancestors as yet to be discovered archaic humans. However, proponents of the Nephilim theory ask if one of these ghost lineages could be the genetic signature of the giants. They also point to mitochondrial haplogroup X2A. Most Native American haplogroups trace back to Asia. But the ancestor of X2A, haplogroup X, originated in the Near East thousands of years ago. While science explains this through complex ancient migration patterns that long predate biblical events, some theorists see it as a genetic breadcrumb trail left by a unique Near Eastern group. However, the specific X2A subclade found in the Americas is not found in Europe or the Near East and likely arose within the early Paleo-Indian population around 13,000 years ago. The ancient remains of Kennewick man, dated to about 9,000 years ago, carried the X2A haplogroup and predates any proposed biblical migrations by thousands of years. There is no scientific evidence linking these genetic findings to biblical Nephilim. When you connect the threads of the theory, the interpretation of biblical verses, the debunked reports of giant skeletons, and the fringe interpretation of genetic data, a radical, alternative picture emerges. It's a picture that, while compelling to some, is not supported by the available evidence. The motive for the Great Erasure. If there is no solid evidence, why does the theory of a giant cover-up persist? This leads to the ultimate question: what would be the motive to hide such a secret? According to the theory, the existence of a Nephilim bloodline would challenge the foundations of our understanding of human origins, from both scientific and religious standpoints. From a religious perspective, it could raise questions about divine authority. If God's judgment via the flood was incomplete, what would that imply? The idea of a parallel, non-Adamic bloodline surviving could also disrupt core theological tenets about the lineage of humanity. From a scientific perspective, the implications would be equally disruptive. Evolution is built on gradual, natural processes. The introduction of a different type of human, potentially with enhanced abilities, would suggest an outside intervention that science is not equipped to handle. Admitting the giants of myth were real would blur the line between empirical evidence and ancient legend. So the alleged cover-up, if it existed, would not just be about hiding bones, but about protecting established narratives. It's the idea that our history is not a straight line, but a tangled web. This possibility that a separate, powerful lineage coexisted with and merged into humanity would force a rewrite of history. It's a world-changing secret, and perhaps that's precisely why the theory is so powerful and enduring, regardless of the lack of proof. We've followed the breadcrumbs of this theory from the cryptic verses of Genesis to forgotten newspaper clippings and the cutting edge of genetic analysis. We've laid out the claims, the alleged evidence, and the scientific and historical facts that challenge them. But now it's your turn. What do you think? Is this all a grand conspiracy theory, built by connecting unrelated dots and misinterpreting ancient texts and modern science? Or is there more to these persistent legends than meets the eye? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Conclusion. In the end, we are left with a fascinating theory but a lack of verifiable proof. The Bible mentions giants, and for a time, archaeology seemed to hint they were real, though those finds have been largely debunked as hoaxes or misinterpretations. And while modern genetics reveals that our DNA holds ghosts of ancient, unknown archaic human ancestors, there is no scientific basis to connect them to the Nephilim of lore. The official story is that the Age of Giants, if it ever existed, is confined to myth and legend. The evidence cited by giant believers suggests something more. It suggests the past is never truly dead. Yet, the final answer, for now, appears to be found not in our DNA, but in the enduring power of these captivating stories. You decide.